You're listening to the Deadly Uncle Podcast,
a safe space for deadly uncle conversations.
All right, we're so lucky today to have Mr. Kirby Redwood on the Deadly Uncle Podcast today. What a blessing.
Yes, Kirby is not only my first cousin, but he is Saulteaux-Cree from Cowessess First Nation, and he has called Moh'Kinsstis, or Calgary, home for 45 years. Kirby has been working in the social services sector for over 30 years, and he's a leader in the sector. He's got a Bachelor of Arts in Criminal Justice, a Master of Arts, and he also has an MBA. So without further ado, we're going to take you to Kirby Redwood.
I grew up on the reserve, obviously, the first 6 years of my life on Cowessess Reserve in the Fort Qu'Appelle area, just east of Regina, about an hour, till I was about 6 years old. And then, as I'm told, my mother packed us all up from the res. When I was 6, my brother was 5, and my sister was 7, and moved us to Regina first for a quick little stint, and then off to the city of Calgary. And it was, just like many other Indigenous families, we had our struggles and our challenges, and there's, a lot of domestic violence and alcohol abuse in our family. So we were kind of running away from some of that, and, ended up in Calgary here, which I now understand to be Moh'Kinsstis, our Treaty 7 Blackfoot brothers and sisters. And so that was kind of my introduction into the city, a res kid coming to the city. I remember the first thing I seen in the city of Calgary was these statues that are downtown Calgary, and it's these tall statues of people, right around Bow Valley College here. And that was the first thing I seen, because I was waking up as a young kid looking, and this is what I seen. And, I remember just being scared and thinking, where the heck are we? These long, big buildings and these tall, lanky statues of people. It was a scary time for a young boy off the res. And as you'd imagine, it was a tough transition. But I've been in Moh'Kinsstis now for I'm 56, right? So for 50 years. And so it's been my home. I grew up in that area, and learned a lot about the Blackfoot culture, because that's where I grew up. And that's my introduction into my culture. It didn't come from my family like most people. It kind of came from the community environment that I was in. And back then the Calgary Friendships and Indian Friendship Center was a big part of that. And so, going to the cultural camps with the Friendship Center and being connected to, people like Rufus Goodstriker was kind of my first introduction into culture, into ceremony. And so from that, it just kind of, junior high school, and college all around the city of Calgary. So not sure where you want me to go from there.
No, that's amazing. So it came into your life, you say, the culture came into your life aspect around junior high. What led you there? Were you just looking for programs as an young Indigenous man? What led you to these programs?
No, it's a really good question. And yeah, it was actually elementary, where I first got introduced to the culture. And then from there, it was as a young Indigenous man in Calgary here, it was a tough transition. So I kind of veered away from the culture for a while, and found some solace in other relationships with other people, and that was surrounded by alcohol and drugs, and so that's where I was kind of at for quite some time, and it really wasn't until I was in my 12th year at high school, and I remember I was living on my own already at that time, and I had a strong relationship with my principal, and he was kind of really instrumental in and here's this white man who was connecting with this indigenous man who was searching for himself at that time, and I was involved in drugs and alcohol at that time. I was even involved in selling drugs at that time, and my principal, he was straight up with me. He says, he goes, I know you're selling drugs, Kirby, and you got to start making some different choices, because if you don't, you're going to go down this one path, right? And he connected me, him and my mom connected to me with this place called the Burns Memorial Foundation, because I was really struggling to just feed myself and to pay my rent. And the Burns Memorial Foundation was kind of one of those doorways that okay, there's other opportunities here. And so I stepped into them, and they kind of supported me with some of those basic needs. And then that kind of opened up the door to some other areas. And I just started working. I graduated from high school, and just went into the auto body industry and started working. But I was getting, I knew that I couldn't do auto body. I didn't want to do auto body. I did iron work. I did sheet metal work, a lot of hard labor things, but I didn't have a good back for it. So I think it was kind of a blessing that I got hurt. I got doing steel. It's like my back isn't built for this. I gotta go back to school. And so that's what I did. I went back to school and, went into criminology corrections thinking, I want to be a cop. I'm going to be a corrections officer. Had a stint at CYOC working with the youth there. And that's where I really connected, started to find my calling, because I went in there as a CEO, right? And as a CEO, you're a guard and you're responsible for, they called us key turners, right? Because that's all you did. You had masses of kids, in different units, 25, 30 or more kids in one unit. So all you were supposed to do was police them. And I couldn't do that. I got into that room and I was drawn to these kids, and these kids were drawn to me. And I remember just sitting, being surrounded by kids, having conversations about their situation, their life, and who I was. And I remember being pulled into to my supervisor's office on numerous occasions, saying, Kirby, you're not there to build relationships with these kids. You're there to police them and ensure safety, right? ensure order, right, of the units. And I said, yeah, I understand that, but still being drawn into those relationships was something that I couldn't veer away from. So eventually they stuck me on night shift, where everyone was locked in lockdown, right? So all I was doing was walking around, and it was fine. I mean, I loved the money. It was great money back then, but I knew it was those relationships. And so I remember my mom gave me a call and said, I work at a group home, an Indigenous group home. We've got 6 Indigenous boys here, teenagers, and all the workers are women. We need males around here. And it's like, I said, I know nothing about working with these kids. And they said, you're male, you're Indigenous, that's your qualifications. Come on, we'll give you a job. And so they did. They gave me a job, and having no experience, no nothing with these, vulnerable youth. I remember going in my first day, and they said, we've got this one young fella, and he has these violent outbursts, and as women we feel unsafe. We don't know what to do with him, and we said, we're going to need your help. And it's like, I said to them, it's like, well, I don't know nothing about working with these young youth. And he says, well, you're male, you're Indigenous, that's all. And that's all we need right now. That's the criteria. Back then, the criteria for hiring was a little different. Nowadays, they want education, they want training, they
criminal
want
record
checks, right? All of these things, right? Anyway, so I remember my first shift, I go in there, and all of a sudden I hear this loud banging and yelling and swearing, and I'm thinking, what the hell's going on here? My first shift, right? And the supervisor lady comes up to me and she goes, well, it's go time. Let's see what you got. And so they threw me into the fire, right? I remember going into this room, and this young fellow was just punching holes in the wall and smashing furniture. And I remember going in there and just closing the door, and all I did was sit down on the bed. And I didn't do nothing. I didn't say nothing. I just sat down on the bed. And it was probably, I kid you not, probably less than 2 minutes. And that young man was sitting down beside me. And so, it taught me a lesson real quick that, it's not about judging or controlling people. When we're working with vulnerable people, it's about creating safe places. It's about building trust and building relationships. And I didn't know what I was doing at the time, but that's what I was doing, and it came natural. And I think it comes natural to our people, that's a natural way of connecting with each other, connecting with our spirit, connecting with our culture and our language and our land and Mother Earth. It's the Cree say Wakotoan, the Blackfoot say Simoks, and it's about living in relationships. And I didn't know that's what I was doing at that time, but now when I reflect back on it, that's what I was doing. I wasn't there to judge this young man. I was just there to be with him. And when he was ready, we could have a conversation and we can talk about different ways of managing some of these emotions that come up within us. And so that was my introduction into this system of human services, of social services, of utilizing Indigenous approaches to working with vulnerable populations. So I walked alongside them, and because I was going through my own trauma, I had my own issues. I have a lot of issues, with addictions, with intergenerational trauma, with systemic racism, the addictions and the abuse that I watched and seen and was exposed to on the reserve. I'm sitting here with my two cousins here, my two brothers, and they probably, you guys don't know my story. And because we haven't had those conversations.
Yeah,
I don't know
some,
you might know some of it, but you don't know
not the whole thing, man.
No, we know pieces of it that were shared to us by our by our parents, by our uncles and aunties. But those are just perspectives. There's perspectives that our own perspective that's different, right? Nobody knows the impact that the alcohol abuse or the sexual abuse that we're exposed to had. We don't know the impact that it had on us, and so your guys are going to hear some of this for the first time. Did I go to residential school? No. My older sister did for 1 year. But did residential school have an impact on me? Absolutely, it did. And one of the ways it did was my older cousins went to the schools and they were abused. And so when they come back from the schools, what would they do? Well, some of that abuse was carried into our homes through them. And so that's what happened to me and my brother. And even me and my brother haven't talked about this directly. But I still have those visuals in my head of the sexual abuse, or have seen sexual abuse, observing sexual abuse happening. And so it had a long-term impact on me. And so, working in this field was not only, something that came natural to me, it was something that I needed for my own healing journey. So I remember them saying to me in that group home, okay, you got to teach them about your culture. And it's like, I don't know shit about my culture, and so it was like we were exploring that together that whole time. And so that was like 1988. I remember that because it was the Olympics in Calgary here. And so I'm taking all of these little brown boys to all these different, Olympic events because people are donating tickets to us. And then from there, we're exploring, in Calgary here, we had Plains Indian Cultural Survival School, which we called PICS. And that was kind of like our cultural, one of our cultural streams of access, along with the Friendship Center. But the Friendship Center came in and went over the years because of some of their own struggles. But, we connected to our culture that way, so we started going to cultural camps and sweat lodges. I remember Lloyd Ewan, the old man Ewan, was one of the men that, conducted sweat lodges for us. And, it was a time where it was like, oh, cool, this is cool. I like the culture, love the singing and the drumming and the songs and sitting in the lodge. But then I was, I'd have to count the days. When was the last time I had a drink? I got to be clean for 4 days. And then I remember sitting in the lodge with Lloyd and the boys, and then going out the night after, or the night, a couple days after, back in the bars, drinking and partying. Right, that was my life. I wasn't really connected in a way where it was was a significant part of my life. I was still struggling and exploring other ways of trying to deal with the trauma, deal with the anxiety that I had. I mean, I had a lot of anxiety, but people never knew, because I apparently I was good at hiding it. I was, my mind is racing inside, about how inadequate I am as a man, how stupid I am compared to everybody else. Going to college, taking that first diploma in criminology corrections, I remember throwing up before class because I was so anxious about going into that classroom. I remember sitting by the door because I needed a quick way out, and that's anxiety, right? That's you know uh, you know mental health and wellness, struggles for somebody who's dealing with trauma. And so I can go so many different places with my story. Like, I searched for help. Right, I knew I was sick. I knew I needed help. I remember doing EMDR with clinicians, but I remember that this tipping point for me was my dad and I had reconnected. My dad got out of Drumheller Penitentiary, and quit drinking. And then we became friends. When I was 19, 2021, my dad and I became pretty good friends. It wasn't like a normal father-son relationship. It was like, we were men, right? And we were coming together for the first time. He missed our childhood. He didn't see us growing up. So he wasn't a dad in that regard. But somewhere along the road, I think I was starting to reconcile that, there was so much dysfunction in our family that, hate, anger, guilt, or blame weren't going to serve me well. And I needed to let go of some of that. And so I honestly, at around 13, I know that because my mom really struggled with that. That's when my mom and I kind of separated a little bit, emotionally, because I came to this point of forgiveness for my father, even though I have visuals of him beating the shit up on my mother. And as a 4, 5, 6-year-old trying to stop my dad from beating up on my mom and being thrown aside, me and my brother, that's what would happen. Even though I seen that, I got to a point where I was able to forgive him. So when he was in Drumheller his last time, we said, let's go visit this old guy because he's not going to live much longer. And so that was easy to go there and see my dad in Drumheller. But I guess for my dad, he shared with me later, he says, I'm sitting in the Drumheller pen and behind this fence. And he goes, and I see my family come walking up because my mom, my brother, my sister, we all went together. But we went, we were all adults, right? So here's my dad looking at his whole family, where in his head, we're probably still all little kids, but we're not anymore, right? And he said that was a turning point for him. And he made his decision there that, alcohol was no longer going to be a part of his life. And because of that choice he made, we became a part of his life at that age, so at 19 years old, I had my dad back. And so, but the turning point was, and I share that story because my dad was part of a turning point, ironically, right? Because he, I went through this depression stage where I couldn't eat, I couldn't think, everything was such a chore. And, I think I got down to about 135 pounds. I was just skin and bones, forcing myself to eat. And my dad said, we need to go see a medicine man. And he says, that's it, we're going. And it's like, whatever, I'll try anything. I said, because I was doing everything I could to try and, get healthier, but nothing was working. So we went and we got into a vehicle and we just started driving, and we drove for hours and hours. And we ended up in this place called think it's called Mission Lake in northeastern Saskatchewan, way the hell up there. It took forever to get there. I think 15 hours or something during the winter, right? And we get there, and I don't know these Indians, right? And all of a sudden we're in this community hall. Little I know now what it was, but back then I didn't know. We were entering into a night lodge. This was a night lodge ceremony. And for those of you that might not know what a night lodge ceremony, it's just that, right? You're doing it in the pitch dark. And so we go into this community hall, and these guys are nailing the window shut. They're nailing the door shut, and I'm wondering what the heck is going on here. I'm starting to kind of panic and get a little claustrophobic.
You're like, Dad, where the hell did you bring me?
Yeah. And so we're all sitting in circle, and I see this old man, and he's surrounded by his boys and a lot of, drums and rattles and all sorts of medicines there, right? And we're all sitting in circle. I still don't know what's going on, right? I know we're in ceremony. I know there's an elder up there, and he's going to conduct a ceremony. And then they say, okay, well, the lights are going to go off, and they're going to, and the grandfathers are going to come in. And I'm thinking, okay, I still don't know what's going on, right? But anyway, I'll never forget it because it was a turning point for me. And the lights went off, and almost immediately that power switch went off, these rattles kicked in, and they scared the shit out of me because it was like they were right there in my face. These rattles were just shaking, and then songs were being sung, and then all of a sudden there's this, I can only describe it as a being that was dancing, because there's about 60 of us in this room, right? A big circle. And the old man was way over there in the corner, but the lights went off and the rattle started, and this being is dancing. And it's massive because you could feel the ground just shaking and vibrating. And I'm still, in fear, right? Trying to figure out what the hell's going on here. And then this grandfather starts speaking to people, and he's speaking to people in a language that I don't understand, but it was Cree, obviously. And then that grandfather comes to, he's right in front of me, and I can feel it. And it just, it's complete darkness, right? So you don't see nothing. Your other senses are kicking in, and you're just trying to, not only figure out what's going on, but you're kind of like in safety and protective mode, and you're I don't know if I had my fists up, gonna fight the spirits, right? But you just don't know. And I remember as soon as that grandfather got in front of me, it was I don't know how to describe it. It was just kind of grounding, and I remember I just kind of gave into it and released, and I knew I was getting blessed. I didn't understand the language that was being spoke to me, but I could feel the language, and I could tell that this grandfather was acknowledging me and was blessing me. And then there was this physical connection, and this hand went over my head like this. The palm of the hand was touching my forehead, and those fingers were at the bottom of my neck. And it was kind of a freaky, eerie feeling to think about how big that hand must have been to be able to do that. But it was also a blessing. And then that ceremony went on for several hours, and then after that, we sat around and we had a feast, and the old lady, I could see her doing some things and she was making medicine pouches, and then she says, come here, and she gave me that medicine pouch, and that was it. That was my connection to this old man and this old lady called Albert and Mary O'Daniel. And so they I say this to this day, they saved me. And because I don't know what would have happened, right? I was lost in that mental health and depression and anxiety. And it's not to say that it all went away, but there was this mechanism, for lack of a better word. It was my culture. And that's that's what saved me to this day, I believe. And now they adopted me, a few years after that, because I would keep on going because I wanted more, right? And so it was Albert Daniel, my mushroom, that adopted me, when I was a young man, and took me in, and gave me so many teachings, and treated me with so much kindness. And kindness is, from an Indigenous perspective, when you're immersed in culture and ceremony, is different than how we understand kindness from a Western worldview. And so it's different, right? You think kind of, oh, you come here, my boy, let me take care of you. Here's some, it's not always like that. Sometimes it comes with a slap, and and not necessarily a physical slap, but
Yeah.
but like a strong, this is culture. We've got protocol. We've
Yeah.
got ways of knowing and being that have been around for millennium, and you need to respect them, and you need to walk in that way. And so it came with that. I remember some of the teachings they would do. I can look back and laugh at them now, and we're time to go. We're going to start the lodge. He says, you take that sled and head down to the lake and go pick some grandfathers. I head down to the lake, and there's 4 feet of snow. I'm in northern Saskatchewan, right? Down at the lake, there's 4 feet of snow. I dig through the snow through the bottom, and I see the grandfathers. Well, they're all iced in, packed in ice. And so 2 hours later, they come and check on me, and I got 2 grandfathers, right? And we need 60 for the lodge, right? And they're just playing with me. There's some lessons there, some teachings there. Obviously, humility is one of them. But it was, despite that, that was, I knew it was where I belonged, and so that was, so now as an as a leader of an Indigenous organization, I tell people we have no clue the impact that we're going to have on somebody when we light the smudge. We have no clue the impact we're going to have on somebody when they come and sit in ceremony with us for the very first time. We have no clue the impact that the smell of our medicines in the air, when they open that door to our organization, that they smell the sweetgrass, they smell the sage and the stone medicine. We have no clue the impact that's going to have on them. But what we do know is that it can be amazing. And so I've been privileged and with my life and given the opportunity to work in an organization where, when I look at my personal values today as a 56-year-old man, as a 56-year-old Escapios, it aligns so well with my organization. And I call it my organization because I am a founder and of that. But now I've moved to an employee, and it was an easy transition because doesn't matter. Ownership means nothing when it comes to our Indigenous ways of knowing and being and leading. And so it was. People always say, "Well, is that tough letting go of ownership?" And it's like, no, because we don't own our culture. Our culture is a gift from Creator, from Natawima, and so even when we create cultural tools of understanding, or you can't copyright that shit. It's completely inappropriate, right? The Westerners want to say, okay, well, we need to copyright that and protect that and make sure nobody
How can we own it?
Yeah, it's like
that's my half brain was thinking that.
Well, yeah, and that's something, I appreciate you saying that, because that's something to acknowledge and recognize, because even though I've had this journey, and I light my smudge here before we started talking, and I ground myself into this conversation, my default system is Western thinking, because I grew up in the city. I was educated in mainstream society, in regular school system, post-secondary and graduate. my default is Western. And so my challenge is to think or try to think Indigenous. And so even though I know the songs of our ceremonies and I'm learning the language, my mushroom always said, I won't tell you exactly what he said because he used to swear at me a lot. You stupid bugger. He'd say, you still don't get it. But I remember saying to him, oh, Mushroom, I got my master's degree in leadership. And he goes, that's good news, Tal. That's good. He says, Stump, come here. And he was standing by the window in his house in Isla Crosse. And he points out and he goes, that's my university, he says. That's my hospital. That's my courts. And he's pointing at the sweat lodge. He's saying, that's where we heal people. That's where we educate people. He goes, it's good you're learning the white man's ways, but don't forget that there's this other way and you need to try and walk with both, he says.
Yeah.
And so that's what I've been trying to do ever since. And it's tough. It's difficult because, as a CEO of a not-for-profit organization, we've got about 75 staff. We're an $8 million organization.
Why don't you tell us the name of your organization?
Sure. Moscato is the name of our organization, and originally it was Pathways, and we got to the point where the elders said, "Okay, you need your Cree name, and your Cree name is Moscato, and Moscato translates in Cree to many little roads or pathways, and that name is symbolic in regards to, each of our journeys as staff and as people that come into our circles. Everybody has their own journey, to well-being, to life, to healing and wellness. And it's not for Kirby or Moscato or anybody else to decide. All we can do as Escapios is to, Moscamaso, let people discover for themselves what that is. All we do is invite them in ceremony. We create opportunities of connection and of understanding where people can come together and feast and sit in ceremony and build relatives, Wakoto and building relatives, and let them discover for themselves what that means. That's all we do as an organization. We offer and we invite.
Beautiful.
You can't, the Western systems, a lot of them are very prescriptive. They're very paternalistic. They're very hierarchical. Ours is not. We worked in some of those systems and still do sometimes. And it's tough for us to function there because there's such a misalignment in how we think and what we want to do, how we want to work with and support our vulnerable families, right? But we need to be there because if we're going to create any sort of change, any sort of systems change, whether it be within our educational systems, our healthcare systems, our justice systems, and our child welfare systems, we got to walk alongside them. Even though we might be at opposite ends of understanding in what our children and families need, we still got to walk with that journey with them because that's where our families are. It doesn't matter what system you look at. There's people. I've been guilty of saying this too, that there's an overrepresentation of Indigenous people within the justice system, within the child welfare system. And an elder corrected me not too long ago, and I just love what he said. He says, you need to reframe that. He says, there's not an overrepresentation of Indigenous people in jails or in the children in child welfare. There's an overrepresentation of Western worldviews imposed on Indigenous peoples. And when he said that, that just resonated with me so much because what it does is that it allows us to kind of let go of some of that anger, some of that resentment, some of that blame, and to create space for how we might move forward differently, how we might move forward together. And I know a lot of people might not agree with that, and that's okay. That's just where I am on my own healing journey. When it comes to child welfare, I've blamed them and pointed the finger at them as to why there's so many Indigenous children in care. And the reality is they're just doing what they know.
Yeah.
What do they know? They know the Indian Act. They know, their child welfare system, right? And it's been functioning the same way for so many years. And so if you're a government worker, you got legislation and policy that you need to adhere to. So you're actually kind of handcuffed.
Yeah.
This is how. That's why they need us. They need
Well, how
us.
much has it really changed? Like, you've been involved with the child welfare system since 1988, and like, you're the reason my parents got involved as foster parents too. So I mean, like, you guys have seen this for a long time. Like, has there been changes, positive changes for like Indigenous children in foster care in your time working in the system? Have you seen it? Or
That's a really good question, Trent. And part of the answer to that is how do you define change? And so if you're wanting to define change from a systems perspective, in systems reform or transformation, well, you could argue all day long that nothing has changed.
yeah,
But if you choose to define change from a person's perspective, from an individual's perspective, from a Moscato's perspective, I would say that a lot has changed.
yeah,
And so and you need to think, when you're looking at government too, you need to look at the systems within the system. So within government child welfare, they have an intervention system, and their focus is on safety. And so if they see a child at risk in a home because of alcohol or because of domestic violence or because of poverty, they think the solution is remove the family, right? That's been the typical mindset and practice. Moscato comes in and says, no, that's not the way to do it. If there's no food in that fridge, well, let's put some food in that fridge. Well,
yeah,
if dad's creating domestic violence in there, well, let's remove dad and help dad address that, or let's apprehend the family. That's what they're doing at our reserve, with Chief Red Bear Lodges. They apprehend the whole family. You talk about systems reform. There's 0 children in care on Cowessess First Nation.
yeah.
Wow.
And that's because of Chief Red Bear Lodge. If there's a safety issue, they apprehend the whole family. You come into Chief Red Bear Lodge and you're here for 90 days. And you're going to address the addictions. We're going to address the domestic violence. We're going to address whatever. And you're going to get supported by the cookums and the mushrooms and by the culture and the ceremony and the community. 0 children in care.
That's amazing.
And that's happening, I think, with a lot more nations. They're taking control of their child welfare systems, right? So hopefully that's a positive change that we can see, in the future, right? Like, we're seeing it on Cowessess right now. If other nations move forward like that, hopefully it'll change the way things are dealt with.
Yeah. And so systems change, systemic change is going to be slow, right? Here's Cowessess First Nation. It's a great story, right? You got Bill C-92 comes in and they create their Moh'Kinsstis Act, which is legislation on their reserve now. So it doesn't matter what chief and council, what the politics are, this is legislation and it's there to stay. And that'll help them guide how they manage the safety of all of their band members, whether they're rural or urban. So you see them now moving into areas like Calgary and starting to build relations and try to figure out how do they support their band members that are living off reserve. Because just like any other reserve, there's only a fraction of their band members that are actually living on the reserve.
Yeah.
And for many of us, our goal isn't to go back to our reserve.
No.
Our goal is just to live healthy within our own communities, right?
Yeah.
So there's some systems change that's slow and incremental, but that Bill C-92, I think, is one of those pieces of legislation that'll really, guide, First Nations communities in taking control of the future of their children and what happens to them when that's at risk. So that's the kind of change that's starting to happen, Trent. But I think more on the individual change, there's more stories like mine, and so that's, that change. We don't need government to change for us to change. Right. And so I feel like if we're able to acknowledge that and step into that and own it, then I think the healing can start, because I'm not going to heal because of truth and reconciliation.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna heal because of my own choices
Yeah.
in how I acknowledge my own trauma and how I move forward through that trauma. And it's not like trauma is going to completely disappear. I'm just going to learn how to deal with it, how to acknowledge it, and how to live with it. You know, trauma never goes away. And you know, I'll share a story with you guys that's really heavy for me. Um, but I'll share it with you because I know it's going to serve me in dealing with that ongoing trauma. Because of the sexual abuse that I was exposed to as a young boy, and because of the sexual abuse I seen as a young boy, um, it had an impact on me, right? And I remember when I became a dad. I mean, proudest moment, right? Looking at my little girl, you know, but all of a sudden it hit, you know, I'm responsible for this little one. It's, you know, I'm the primary caregiver. I need to protect her and keep her safe. And in my mind, it's like all those things that happened to me, that's not going to happen to my little girl. Nobody's going to touch my little girl. I'm gonna protect her and keep her safe. And, you know, so that's the way I was thinking. But then, you know, the trauma creeps in. That, you know, that trauma that you're exposed to, it rears its ugly head, and we don't often understand how it's going to rear its head. But it reared its head with me in my dreams, and I would have nightmares. And these nightmares that I would have, and I haven't told anybody about these nightmares except my wife. And so you guys are hearing it, and I'm sharing it for the first time, you know, openly. I would have nightmares that I would have nightmares that I was sexually abusing my dog. And you know, I thought, you know, I've said that a few times, and I thought I was, you know, I am moving through this and forward with this, but it's still heavy. You see how heavy
Yeah.
it is, right?
Mm-hmm.
That trauma, it doesn't go away. You just learn to live with it. But those nightmares were so real. I'd wake up in cold sweats, and I'd go run to my girl's room and make sure she was okay. But that's intergenerational trauma. That's trauma, right? And so, you know, our culture plays a role in helping us navigate that and helping us manage it in a way that's both spiritual, mental, emotional, and physical. And so
Yeah.
that's the value of our culture. And that's why I'm a strong advocate for our culture. That's why every, you know, people, you know, they say you know, they call me the CEO of an organization, but I don't actually like that title. I refer to myself as the lead Scopios. And the Scopios, as many of you know, is the helper of elders, the helper of ceremonies. And so that's what Moscato is, right? It's this, it's a, Moscato is a mushroom. You know, it has Ushpagan. It has its own traditional songs. And so, you know, I'm a helper of that. I'm a lead Scopios of that. And so, you know, tomorrow morning I'm going in the lodge like I do every Friday, because as a lead Scopios of Indigenous organization, you know, that's important. You know, people say, "Oh, you get to sit in a sweat lodge every Friday." Oh, that sounds like a vacation and a holiday. And for me at this stage of my life, it kind of is. But
Mm-hmm.
I've earned that, and that's an important part of who I am as a man. And I think it's important for somebody who's leading an Indigenous organization to kind of walk that way of life. It doesn't mean that I'm some sort of saint or anything. I'm still a man. Still say stupid shit and
You're
make
extra holy, bro.
I still fall on my face and make mistakes, and but I'm able to find ways to find correction and guidance, and so, you know, I love the life that I have now. It's not easy. You know, I have a partner, a life partner upstairs, and we still have our squabbles and our differences, you know, because we're human, right? We, you
Mm,
know, we make mistakes, but the culture is something that still grounds me. You know, it serves so many purposes for me in my life, and like I said, it saved me, and it's, you know, so tomorrow when I sit in the lodge, you know, I'll think about my girl, and I'll think about my nightmares, which I haven't had in years, but it's, you know, when I still say that word, you know, and acknowledge those nightmares, it's still heavy, right? Because that's how important that little one is to me, who's now 27 years old, and,
yeah.
and but
I think
yeah,
it's important that you shared that, like to show, you know, not only vulnerability, but that you have struggled with mental health, as I have. You know,
Mm.
yeah,
I struggle with anxiety and depression, and that's what we want to talk about openly with people and let men know that it's okay to talk about these things,
You
right?
know,
yeah,
yeah, that's it. Like, thank you so much, Kirby, for sharing your you know, your story, your testimony here, because I think a lot of men can you know, find answers through your stories. And that's why we created this podcast, was to have a safe space for men to be able to connect. And you know, that kind of leads me into my next couple of questions for you. You know, growing up, you know, in through your journey, how important do you think it is for men to have programs, you know, to be able to have safe spaces to, you know, communicate like this and talk about their feelings and really find a way to heal? And then the second question that I have is, um, do you think that it's time for every major city across Turtle Island to have a safe space for Indigenous people to pray, with inside the city limits, not outside in the on our land, but right inside of our cities where we can have sweats and those type of things, and also even funerals and kind of
hmm,
like a community center for people who can't make it out to, you know, to the reserves. And a
hmm,
lot of times, you know, there's a lot of people that come from other places that have built a community where it would be nice to celebrate their life inside that city if there was a space for that. So two of those questions.
yeah. No, great questions, and I appreciate that, Kurt. You know, I think the first one, and you know, about men having those spaces, I think that's been, you know, again, a Western practice that's been imposed and adopted by a lot of Indigenous people and agencies. Is that a lot? If you look at all of the programs that are out there, you know, you know, probably 99% of them are kind of geared towards the mother and the child, right? And that's, you know, that's a Western worldview, right? So an Indigenous worldview is, you know, the family unit, the community, you know, the extended family. That's how you deal with you know, any issues of trauma. And I'm going to quickly tell you a Wakotuan story that I seen on the news that made me cry and just blew me away, and I questioned my own ability to acknowledge Wakotuan. There's a story on the news in this northern community. I think it was Winnipeg. Um, there's these 3 or 4 boys, young Indian boys on the reserve, headed home. They got their skates around their shoulder. They just come from the lake. They're headed home after a day on the lake skating. A drunk driver comes by and hits them, you know, and this is a true story. And I seen this on the news. Um, the next day, the news are in that community and they're talking to this man who just lost his son the day before. They got him on the news, and obviously, this man is distraught. He's very emotional. And this man says, that man who ran over and killed my boy, he's welcome to come sit in ceremony with us. And he's welcome to come sit in ceremony with us because that's our way. That's how we heal. That's how we mourn. That's how we move forward. That's Wakotuan. And when I seen that story, I was blown away by this man. And I just thought, holy shit, would I be able to do that? And I still don't know the answer to that. But that's, you know, that's the true impact of our culture that it can have. and that man obviously had opportunities and teachings that allowed him to connect to his ceremony and culture that way. So we need to, do our best to erase those perspectives or thoughts or stereotypes. Men don't cry. What a bunch of horse shit, eh? I grew up being told that, and that didn't serve me well at all. I'm okay with crying now. And when we sit in the ceremonies every weekend, every Friday at the sweat lodge, there's men in there that cry every single week, and we see and it happens because they know there's safety, there's respect, there's no judgment. How you are, that's how you're welcome, and that's what our ceremonies and cultures do, right? They create that safety. So we need to create more space for that to happen. And so to your point, Kurt, yes, we need spaces in the city where we can light our smudge, because often our elders say, we get invited to go into these buildings, into these circles in the city, and they say, oh, but you can't light your smudge in here because we've got bylaws, and the elders say, oh, so you invite me into your home, but I can't be myself. And so that sends a clear message, right? And so yes, we do need a space for that, and Moscato is one of those. We had an elder call us a few weeks back, and he says, we can't find any place to do our 4 days of mourning. We can't find any place to do our overnight mourning ceremony, overnight and morning ceremony for a lost one. And so Moh'Kinsstis said, come here, come to our building. You can do it here. But we just happen to have a standalone building where we have full control over it. The owners allow us to do that, but it's not ours. At any given moment, the owner could say, "Hey, what the hell are you doing? You got a dead body in there," and it's like, that's how they would look at it. Whereas us, this is a mourning, cultural, spiritual process, right?
Yeah.
And so we need that. We need that. Absolutely, we need that. So that people can address the mourning and the trauma and show our young ones and little ones how it should be done, how it has been done for millennium. So we need places. We have a vision of an organization, and our vision is children, youth, and families thrive in a culturally responsive community. And we pride ourselves on not defining culture. Culture is defined by the individuals and the individual's choice. All we do is, like I said, we offer and we invite, and if somebody comes in, before we started, we were just Cree, right? Cree and Ojibwe, because that's who we are. Or sorry, Cree and Saulteaux, because that's who we are. But what started happening is, our Cree and our Saulteaux families started coming, and they're bringing their spouses, and their spouses were Blackfoot, we're Stony, we're Ojibwe, we're Métis, whatever, right? So we had to expand our circles. And so, I remember sitting in the sweat lodge for years, and the grandfathers would say, they're coming. It's like, who's coming? And this one time, this one man came to us, and he was from south, from the Bloods. And he says, I want to do a night lodge, and this Blackfoot night lodge, and we had no clue, right? Well, it's like, we don't know nothing about that. He goes, well, these are the elders, and he gave us the elders and said, all right, we'll connect to the elders, and we connected to the elders down south, and we said, we have some families here that want your ceremony, and I said, we have a place where you can do it. He goes, okay. He goes, I'll come, and then he says, but I like to sweat first before I do that ceremony, that all night ceremony. And he said, sure. He goes, do you have a place where we can sweat? And it was like, yeah, you can come to our Cree sweat lodge if that's okay with you. And he goes, absolutely. He goes, all right. And so anyway, me and my brother Patrick are getting the lodge ready, and we go in, and we got everything, and then they start coming in, and when you're doing it, you're just in your prayers, right? And I remember, just as we were about to close the door, I lifted my head and I looked up And there was 6 Blackwood elders sitting in our Cree teepee, Cree sweat lodge. And I thought, that's what the Mushum meant by they're coming. And from that point on, they knew who we were, and they were coming to check us out. And
Mm,
that because we were in their territory, and
yeah,
we've been running these Cree sweat lodges for over a decade. And so now they're coming to see, yeah, the old man needed to lodge before the ceremony, but they're also coming to check us out. And I remember one elder that was sitting in there goes, I seen you at the powwows for years. He goes, I had no idea that you knew these songs in this way. And that's because we kind of, out of respect, we just kind of, kept to ourselves. We didn't
yeah,
want to offend or disrespect anybody. So we'd go out onto private land, onto Crown land, and build our sweat lodge. And, if we were on Crown land, every now and then, Alberta Parks would come in with their bulldozer and knock it all down, just desecrate our ceremonial grounds. And that was kind of our life, right? We're still, it's not our territory, so we still got to find these spaces where we conduct our ceremonies. But we need more of them. We need more of them within the city and
yeah,
out on Crown land. And so,
yeah. Totally. And if you look at it like within our cities, there's so many places for non-indigenous peoples to pray with churches and stuff.
mhm,
And I'm actually I've been filming a lot of churches around you know, Turtle Island in our travels with music. And I'm doing a documentary on that because I would really like to see spaces in every major city for us to have a place to pray. And
mhm.
it's wonderful that you have a spot in. So where is your business located? Where's the building located?
Well, it's, we've got a great building in Sunridge Mall area. We're just off Barlow Trail. But unfortunately, the
Yeah.
the pandemic has hit everybody hard, right? And
Yeah.
Yeah.
we've got this 26,000 square feet, and we literally got like 2 full-size teepees in there, and the elders love it, and they come and do ceremonies in there all the time. But the pandemic hit us, and we lost some contracting, and we got to move because we can't afford $480,000 a year. So we're having to downsize like a lot of people, and so we're having to move. So now we're back in that space where we're negotiating with potential new building owners
Oh,
the ability to say, hey, we need to smudge.
Yeah.
That's kind of that's a game changer for us. If you can't let us smudge, we got to find someplace else. So that's
How
where
did
we're
it,
at right
I
now.
just got a quick question about that because as a housing outreach worker, we when we move people into places, landlords can't stop you from smudging in your personal residences now. So how does that work in businesses? Because there was a court case saying that if they try to stop you from smudging, it's religious persecution. Like we use that as as housing outreach workers to argue with landlords about it because
Yeah,
that court case was actually in the courts
yeah. You know,
before.
and again, Trent, that's one avenue of taking that. You can take that hard nosed battle attitude and go in there and fight for your rights, or you could try to build relatives and
Yeah,
educate and inform, right? And so
yeah.
we want to be in a place where people want us, right? If I go in there with with guns a blazing and I might get my way, but then there's going to be those residual negative relationships and emotions that you don't want to surround our ceremonies,
yeah,
right? So we go in there with a softer approach, one where we educate and inform them about, we pick the sage right up here on Nose Hill. It's local to here. The sweetgrass is all around here. This is what we're burning, and we show them, right? And we talk to them a little bit, and we share parallels. That's what they're doing in all these churches. They're doing
yeah,
their own smudging. This is just an indigenous one. And the reality is this has been going on here for thousands of years,
yeah.
and now here we are asking permission to keep doing it. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
it's a challenge, it's a struggle, but it's a real battle, and I think that's one of the reasons why, as an organization, we're exploring ownership, right? We're wanting to go down that route where if we own the building, then we don't have to
Do
answer to
whatever the hell
anyone.
you want.
Yeah.
So when is the next big round dance?
Our next big round dance is What's the Saturday? I don't have my phone here, do I? Oh yeah, but I don't want to mess with the calendar. February, the third week in February. Is that the 24th or the 25th?
I'm not sure exactly.
Where's your calendar? I want
got-
because I want to get a shout out to that because I just had a round dance committee meeting just before I got on here.
Where's my calendar?
February.
Okay, February. So I'm in November, December, January. Third week in February. Saturday is the 25th.
25th. Saturday, February 20th.
Oh no, third is the 18th. Sorry.
No, it's the 25th.
Oh, it's the 25th. Okay.
Yeah. We're at the Genesis Center, and so the poster should be going out soon. And again, that's one of our ceremonies, right? And
I'll be there. I'll be
Good.
there set up with my goods. So you better come grab some quills for your honey and your daughter.
we're gonna have like over 2,000 people there, and
Yeah.
it's gonna be an awesome event, and it's it's connecting with old friends and making new friends, building relatives, and so a shout out to the Moscato Round Dance, February 25th at the Genesis Center.
Oh yeah, the
Calgary.
last time I was there was before COVID.
Yep.
So like I'm so looking forward to being there. And yeah, I'll definitely be set up with my quills and just having a ball over there.
Awesome.
Yeah. No, it's great. It's great to see that you're doing that still. It's one of the best ones in Calgary. It is. Yeah.
Yeah. I really appreciate this opportunity, guys. I said to you, I said, maybe we'll chat for about 30 minutes, but we're over an hour here. And
Yeah, I guess we can. Well, we could keep going, but no, this is great. Everything that you shared with us was awesome.
Yeah.
It was more than what we expected.
Yeah, for sure.
Definitely, for sure.
You definitely are
a deadly uncle.
Awesome. I always wanted to be called a deadly uncle.
So you'll be getting a deadly uncle hat as part of our gifts to all of our men here. And like we said, it was awesome to have you on a personal level and on a professional level, because we know you personally, but we learned so much with the audience about your life and who you are as a man. And, even the story between you and your father, and, you coming back to him and going through the whole abuse system and stuff like that. It really, a lot of men are going to resonate with this episode. I think it's one of our best so far. And so thank you so much.
And shout out to your dad. I miss your dad a lot. So.
Nanaskamon, my brothers.
Okay. Thanks.
Hi, brother.
Take care.
Talk to you again soon.
Okay, bye.
You're listening to the Deadly Uncle Podcast,
a safe space for deadly uncle conversations.